G'day Trailblazers, my name is Cam, and in today's video, I'll be demystifying server-side JavaScript and making it more approachable to learn. I'll be showing you the language and some basic syntax of server-side JavaScript, demonstrating some of the functional similarities between server-side JavaScript and AMPscript, including some code examples, and I'll be showing you some cool things you can do in server-side JavaScript which will make it all the more valuable to learn. So to start with, server-side JavaScript is one of the 3 programmatic languages you have access to inside of Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Most customers start with AMPscript as their first language to learn. Not too many people use GTL, but server-side JavaScript is one of the biggest, most powerful languages that unfortunately all too many marketers fail to learn properly. The curious thing is that server-side JavaScript is just a server-side implementation of a typical client-side JavaScript. It's effectively the same code and same syntax. What this means is that you'll have a lot of access to resources online to learn how to do JavaScript, and that same learning is applicable in your server-side JavaScript experience in Marketing Cloud. You'll find this as you go through to the documentation page on the Marketing Cloud developer site. You'll find here lots of examples of how JavaScript is similar to server-side JavaScript. Additionally, as a learning resource, I totally recommend going to the W3 schools, starting with the JavaScript tutorial. I'll put links to these 2 resources in the video description below. What makes server-side JavaScript so easy to learn inside Marketing Cloud is it has so many similarities to AMPscript. Not so much in the syntax, but in the functions you can do with it. If you jump into the documentation page, you can jump into the syntax guide and see for yourself how the syntax works, and underneath it is the list of all functions, and you may recognize a lot of these headings. The ability to do data extensions, date time, HTML, and so much more. This means we have a lot of great comparisons between AMPscript and server-side JavaScript as we learn to get it today. So the best way to learn is to get hands-on, so we can jump into the server-side JavaScript syntax page here and see for ourselves how to get started with our server-side JavaScript code block. You can see straight away on our documentation page, the way to declare a code block of server-side JavaScript is very similar to a JavaScript code block on a HTML web page. We use the script tag. But unlike the client-side JavaScript, we use the run@server command to specify this as server-side JavaScript. So let's jump into Marketing Cloud and start our own code block and practice building this for ourselves. So the first thing we'll do is log into Marketing Cloud and jump into our cloud pages. Now once here, I've got a cloud page collection which has all my testing scripts in it. So I'm going to jump in and create a new content, create a new landing page, cloud page. Call this one my SSJS testing. Make this one as a blank landing page layout, and I'll go save. Now, while that saves and publishes, I'm also going to jump into Content Builder over in Email Studio, make myself a new cloud page content block, my folder ready to go. I'll jump up here and go create a new content block. I'll make a HTML content block. Now for this block, I'll make the content simply SSJS goes here, just to start with. I'll save it as SSJS goes here, and I'll save this as my SSJS testing. This, of course, is my testing block in Content Builder, which I'm going to link into my cloud page to make my development and testing much faster. With that saved, I can now go back onto my Content Builder and click into that tile once more, which shows me the ID of my content block. I'm going to copy that content block ID. Now I can jump back into my cloud pages, and here's my published cloud page. Now scroll down. What I'll do, I'm going to delete this slot for now. What I could do actually is just change my view to defaults and use a HTML block like that. In my block, I can go %% equals content block by ID. Open brackets, and of course I could browse my block, but I know my block ID already. So I'll go open quotes, paste close quotes, close brackets, and %% equals. That should now directly reference that content block. So I can do done, but I'll do one more thing first. I don't like how it always aligns to the top left like that. So I'm just going to jump into my CSS and quickly change one thing to make it a bit easier. I'm just going to add some more margin to this body. So I might go margin 50 px for my top, and then for my left, I'll do another 50 px. Just to bring that content off the sides a bit. You can see there it is there, just off the sides. With that done, I'm going to go schedule and publish. Now it's going to look up that content block and bring back, hopefully, SSJS goes here. Yes, it does. Perfect. So our testing block is ready to go. So I'll go publish. And now we have a really nice clean cloud page, which is already published. So I can jump into my content block. What means I can do is my SSJS goes here. Well, I can edit this. Goes here live. When I save that block, I can go directly back into my cloud page link. You can see that cloud page and there it is live. There's no need to wait for it to republish and see my published changes straight away. So let's now jump in and do some code examples to show how to get started doing some server-side JavaScript. I can drop my placeholder text and let's go into our server-side JavaScript documentation and start off with our code block. Now what I can do is I can simply copy that code, press drop it into my content builder and paste. That should now be my declared server-side JavaScript opening. Great. Done effectively the same thing as I would have done in AMPscript by going %, code block open, and then code block closed. That's effectively the same thing. In fact, what I can do is, to make this easier, SSJS, I can do AMPscript. Now I can show you these two code pieces side by side. So what we can do next, you can start to look at some similarities of these functions and show you how to code similar AMPscript functions inside of server-side JavaScript. So if we jump into our server-side JavaScript, what we can have a look at is some of our basic functions to do. Now the first thing that everyone should learn, of course, is how to declare a variable and how to use those variables throughout your code. Now I do believe this is covered in a separate link under the documentation, but we can also use the JavaScript tutorial on W3 Schools. So for example, I can jump down on my tutorial here. Through introduction, outputs, and so on, I can find my variables. So I can set and declare variables. Now there's a little bit of a syntax thing you have to be aware of. Is that the server-side JavaScript inside of Marketing Cloud uses a very specific type of syntax. It's a specific JavaScript implementation. So you do have to use the var denotation when declaring variables inside of server-side JavaScript. So let's try this example to begin with. We can declare x as a variable, y as a variable, and set some values, and then produce some math. So let's copy that example and jump back into our code. We can do JavaScript goes here, remove that, and put our code in. Now to do this inside of AMPscript, we would have said set at, and we've said x being equal to 5. Then we've said set at y being equal to 6, and then set at z being equal to, we've had to do the add function, and would have been the x adding y. And that's how you would have done things in AMPscript. So JavaScript is a little bit cleaner. We can do math inline. But what about printing out these values? I should be able to save this as it is. And I can, of course, go back and refresh my page, but nothing's coming out. I've not printed those functions out just yet. So back onto my code block here. Let's print out some functions. So how do we print things in AMPscript? Well, of course, we can use the v function. Now, I think we can use the v function, we have to use output actually inside of the code block. So we could say output line, and then we could output the line of z. I think we can do vz like this. That should print out the z, which is the addition of 5 plus 6. So if I go save and I refresh my page here, I should see 11. Perfect. What about for server-side JavaScript? Well, we have a really cool function called write, the ability to write out something. Just like we can output a line, we can write using server-side JavaScript. So inside my functions, I can scroll down here now and find my utilities. Now under here, my string functions, and I should be able to find write. Here we go. So I can write out a function. Now to be aware though, we haven't loaded in our core library just yet. So I'll show you what happens if I try to use my write function as it is now. Jump in and I'll put write as my function. I'll go post, I'll leave that text in there as it is, and I'll go publish. Doesn't work. Now the reason is we haven't loaded in our core library to use the write function like this. Instead, without our core library, we have to do a different function. So if I jump into my platform functions, into my platform utilities, and I can use a different write. And I believe it's maybe down here somewhere else. There is a slightly different write function to use, but what I'll show you instead is how to do the write function normally. So actually, there it is there. No, that's the original write. All right. Let me show you first inside of the syntax. I'll go back into our server-side JavaScript syntax, and on our documentation here, we'll find loading a library. Now you'll often see this code put into most server-side JavaScript implementations. This is it here, the platform core library. So I'm going to copy that code and I'll show you where to put it. We put it after we open the script tag, just like that. And with the platform call loaded, our write function should work. So I'll go save, go back to my page and go refresh, and there we go. So we now are outputting server-side JavaScript like you can see. What I'll do is I'll put some page break here. So you can see the difference, and now this is the string to display. We are now writing out that string to display. Go refresh, and there it is. But we want to show the number of our maths. So we can go back and change our code to output the value of Z. Now these quotation marks, double quotes, that denotes text. We can remove that and just print Z, the variable of Z. No quotation marks, just that value. Exactly as we've done down here with the @ to declare a variable, we don't have to do that inside server-side JavaScript. We just write exactly the letter as it is, or the name of the variable, whatever we've called it. We could call it ZZ, and there it is. Now we can go save, and once again run that page, and there we are. Server-side JavaScript, our math is equal to 11, AMPscript math is equal to 11. How good's that? So math is much easier. Using server-side JavaScript, we can just add those two values together. But what about concatenation of strings? Can we join two sets of strings together? Well, yes we can. In AMPscript, of course, we do this by doing a concat function. So we could say, if I wanted to have my result is equal to, so I could say set at string is my math is equal to, and then I can print out the value. And so I would then say something like concat, I would concat at st, and then z. That would produce my math is equal to, and then the result. So I can try and save that, and jump back into my page and refresh. My math is equal to 11. Great. What about server-side JavaScript? Well, again, things get really easy here. We use that same copy, and I can instead say write, and I can say write that plus, and then our value. We don't have to use a concat. The plus sign works for both math and for string concatenation. So my math is equal to plus ZZ, and there we are. The result still comes out the same. So again, functions become a little bit easier once again. What about some more complex statements? What about the if statements? Well, of course, we could do things inside of AMPscript using our usual if statements. Let's clean up our code, make ourselves a new if statement. So we could say set at v is equal to 1. Then we could say if at v is equal to 1, then set what? Set string is equal to true. Else we would set the at string to be equal to false. End if, and then of course we could print out the result by saying v and st. By doing this, because v is equal to 1 and we're checking if equals 1, we should be printing the word true. So we can try that out for ourselves. We'll save our code block and refresh our cloud page. True, good. What about for server-side JavaScript? Well, again, things get so much easier. What we can do for server-side JavaScript is use a function base. So we can say if something is true, do the result. Else, do something else. This is how we do an if statement inside of server-side or JavaScript. So instead we can say, well, we'll make var, or we use var v. So var v equals 1. Also notice that when we do a code line inside of server-side JavaScript, we end that code function or that line with a semicolon that denotes that that function has stopped, and we can now start the next function. So v is equal to 1. If v is equal to 1, then what? Now we can break this up and make it a bit cleaner. There we go. So if v is equal to 1, then we can write true. And if it's not equal to 1, else false. There we are. And of course, there's no need to say if end or end if. We just close off those brackets, and that's it, all done. I can then drop out that information, and there is our script. So, just that piece there. Let's go save and check this out for ourselves. There we are, same again, SSJS is true. So even doing if functions is a bit easier and a bit cleaner. There's no ambiguous starting and ending of if statements, it's really well contained within these curly brackets. You can see very clearly where they all start and stop. They're all bracketed up. This also makes it much easier to write inside of a code platform like VS Code Studio, because it means that you can actually select those brackets and see where they open and close. A lot less ambiguous than the if, then, else, end if statements using AMPscript. Okay, so variables, math, strings, and if statements are all pretty easy between AMPscript and Server Side JavaScript, but now time for my favorite function, the for loop. First of all, let's do a for loop in AMPscript and show what it looks like. So traditionally, you do something a little bit like this. You'd say for at I being equal to 10 to, oops, at I being equal to 1 to 10 do, and then you would say next I. And what you would do is do something within this loop. And so we do something such as we would output the line of the value of I. Now doing this inside that loop would mean that it would loop through and count from 1 to 10, outputting it on each line. Now, it doesn't do it on each line, sorry, it just puts it out into one great big long string. So I'll say concat, and we'll concat I with a break line to print it out one for each line. Let's try that out and see what it looks like. So that's our AMPscript for loop. And there we go, counting 1 through 10. What about loops in server-side JavaScript? Now we can jump back into our code. Let's clear out our previous code and make our for loop. Now loops get much easier inside of JavaScript. And once again, you can jump into W3 Schools, into the JavaScript tutorial. You can see it here on JavaScript. You can scroll down and see some loops for ourselves. And here it is, a JS loop for, a for loop. Now once again, because the JavaScript is very similar, we can copy this code and use it inside of our Marketing Cloud code. One small change though, we won't use let, we will use var, but I'll show what that looks like. Jump in and we can make some space and paste it in. So for, I'm going to say var, for the var of I starting at 0 until it is, we don't want this crazy number, we want to say until it is less than 10, less than or equal to 10, then keep counting. And what we'll say is we'll say that the value to print out, we'll say write, we're going to write the value of I plus line break. There we are. So the same function, although we'll start I at 1, so it's the same as our AMPscript, and there we go. So for the variable of I starting at 1 until I is, or while I is less than 10, we are going to continue to increment and print out that value. For loop for AMPscript, of course, starting at 1 until 10, do this function, return the start. So let's see how these two functions compare side by side when we print them out. And there we go, the same result. Server-side JavaScript 1 through 10, AMPscript 1 through 10. So as you can see, the code is a little bit simpler. We write all the main code set in one line, starting and stopping with brackets. No need to look for the do and the next statements. Makes it a bit cleaner. So what about the common use case for loops, which is to use it to print out some HTML inside the code block? Well, in AMPscript, we do that by having our code block doing our for loop. Then here we have our output line concat. We'd break our for loop, our code block here, do some HTML, print it out, and then resume our code block to continue with the next function. But how would that look inside of server-side JavaScript? Well, let's do it first inside AMPscript so I can show you what it looks like. I'll drop out our JavaScript so it looks like this, returns back our AMPscript, there it is. And now let's print out some of our AMPscript for loop. Now we can do this by using a table, like so. Now our table should have a border being equal to 1, so we can see the table of course. Within our table we have some TRs and some TDs for our rows and our columns, our cells. Of course here is a piece to repeat 10 times. So what we could do is we could take our for loop code and put it above the cell. We could then break our AMPscript code block, like so, resuming it again, like so, and when we were printing out the output line previously, we can now put our HTML, just like that. And if I clean this code up, you can see pretty clearly, we've got our AMPscript starting our for loop, then breaking the AMPscript, doing our HTML before resuming our AMPscript. Now inside these cells, we could of course do the AMPscript to print, which is equals v, and we could print out the value of I, counting to 10, just like that. If I go save, let's run it and see what it looks like. There we are, there is our cell. So now we have our 10 counting numbers. Now what about a second for loop to count all the way to 100? We could do that by making another for loop outside of our columns and our rows like this. So we could do one there and then one here for our other next. I'm going to rename these. This will be our row to start with. So our rows starting and ending, then our columns starting and ending, printing off our column number. Now, to do this math properly, to count from 1 to 100 in a 10 by 10 grid, we have to use some more functions. So what I'll do is I'm going to do some math function. Now to do this properly, the answer here, you start on row 0 up to count of 9. We're going to do some math. We're going to do a multiply. We're going to multiply the row, so it's at row, at r, by 10. And once we have that, we're then going to add the column number that they're on, like so. Adding column, and then printing that all out. This should work. So we start with our rows starting and ending, our columns starting and ending. So for each row, we're going to print out the TR and close it, and for each column, we're going to print out the TD and close it, with our math being the row number times 10 plus the column number. So our row starts at 0, so 10 times 0 is 0, plus 1 for our first column is 1. It cycles through C, and then returns to number 2, which prints out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way to 10. Then it goes on to our next row, incrementing from 0 to 1. So 1 times 10 is 10, plus 1 is 11. So we should have our 10 by 10 grid printing out 100 numbers. Look at that. So how can we do this in server-side JavaScript? Well, let's jump in now and have a look. We can use our for loop once again by jumping onto our JavaScript for loop. So we'll copy out our for loop like we already had, jumping into our code block and print. Now for our code block, we're going to use the same syntax. We're going to use the rows as our first set, so R. We're going to count from 0 to 9, incrementing R. Then we're going to write out those values. Now, here's where things get more interesting. We can do this more efficiently using server-side JavaScript. So our first for loop starts from 1 to 9. Our second for loop, from 0 to 9. Our second one, our column, C, and C, and C, will go from 1 to 10, just like our one below. Now inside of these two functions, we can then do a single write. So we can say, write, and we're going to write out what? Well, it's going to be TD, and then of course TR. Now inside of this is going to be our function. Now this is currently one string text. We need to break our string text, like so. Using the concatenation inline function, which is the plus symbol, plus, then we can print out our equation. Our equation is the same as before. We want to add the two numbers and multiply two numbers. So we want to multiply r by 10. So we can simply say inside the bracket, r times 10, the math functions. Once we have that number, we then want to plus our C number, like so. And there we are. We now have numbers and strings in the same line. Now, we're not quite done yet. We do have to also write out our TR and TDs. So we can write out our TR to open and our TD to close. Oh, sorry, TR to close, like so. Closing, oops, that one's closing on TD. So we have opening and closing. We of course want to open and close our table as well. And then closing our table. There we are. So with that done, let's now drop out our AMPscript example. And we should be able to print out our server-side JavaScript. So let's go save and see what it looks like. Very close. I got some math wrong though. I left that as the same number. It's not until it's less than 10. It's less than or equals 10. Try that again. And we missed one more. It's this one here. There we are. And now we should have 10 by 10 all the way to 100. So as you can see, doing it in server-side JavaScript is actually quite lean. Besides writing out the functions as we have done, we actually can combine our string and text much more simply. There's no need for those complex math functions. We can write it much more simply in line. Once again, learning this code is really easy using online resources like W3 Schools to see how to use this syntax in place. As you can see, lots of great examples on their website, so worth taking a look. Additionally, you can keep practicing how to do server-side JavaScript functions by referencing the server-side JavaScript function library against the AMPscript function library. For example, you can jump straight in to things like the server-side JavaScript syntax guide, expand that option and go down to your data extension functions, or actually even better, going down further into our platform functions, data extension here. What you'll find is under your platform data extensions, here they are, some very familiar names here, lookup ordered rows, and so on. Of course, those are the same functions as you're used to doing AMPscript. If we jump now into the AMPscript documentation under data extensions, we find those same kinds of rows. Things like insert and lookup rows. So for example, the lookup row function, as you can show here by the documentation, is used to look up a row using those ordinals of the data extension name, the field, and the value. There we are there. We can jump back into the server-side JavaScript function for lookup and see almost exactly the same thing, that same syntax being used to look up values. And some great code examples, so you can practice these for yourself and get to understand how to use server-side JavaScript better. So I've talked enough now about the similarities between AMPscript and server-side JavaScript. Let's now talk about some key differences and strengths that server-side JavaScript brings to Marketing Cloud. And to start with, one of the biggest gaps between AMPscript and server-side JavaScript, which was only just closed recently, was the handling of JSON objects, the JavaScript object notation. Now, recently, we had the new AMPscript function, the build row set from JSON. Great thing is, on our documentation here on the reference guide for AMPscript, we can jump down into our content functions into build row set. We can find here a great example using some flight data and a great code example to show how to use it. So we can head down here to our code example and we can see we've got a great big code dump here. Let's copy this and dump it into our content block to see how it runs. So we'll jump into our AMPscript section here. I'll go paste and there's a good 70 lines of AMPscript to achieve this outcome. So what we'll do is we'll go save and let's run this to see what the output is. Now hopefully we get a flight table. We do. Origin, destination, price per bag, surcharge. Okay, so a table with 4 columns in it and 3 rows plus the header. Now to achieve that, there was quite a lot of code that went into it here. A lot of breaking and starting of code blocks and HTML and all kinds of things built in there. Yes, there is some commentary there which made the code a bit longer, but still, it's a really big amount of code. The great thing is that JSON, JSON, is JavaScript object notation. So as you can probably imagine, it's actually a lot easier to achieve inside of server-side JavaScript. Let's instead try and achieve this using server-side JavaScript. And to start with, you would have noticed that when we dumped our code in, we had to set the @JSON object in AMPscript to this great big long text value. And from that text value, we then built a row set, and used that row set to go and do things and row check and for loop and all kinds of things after that. However, it's a bit easier using server-side JavaScript. So jumping into our documentation for our row set, I'm just going to take our JSON object from the start. Here it is here. Notice that our object uses the curly and square brackets, and there is no quotation marks around it. Unlike down here with the AMPscript example, there is a single quotation mark used to open and to close. We're not going to do that. Jumping into our code page, and I'm going to say var JSON equals and paste. And so now here is our JSON variable. Now because it is a JavaScript notation, this works exactly as is. That's our variable set for JSON. Great. Now we can use this variable. So we can start to navigate this JSON object easily. Now, I'll show you one cool trick if you're in Chrome. What you can do is you can jump in to Chrome like I am right now. I'm going to copy that JSON object again. I can press F12. In F12, I can go to my console by clicking it here. I can make sure the console is cleared by clicking the clear button. And I can paste my JavaScript object notation in our JSON object. Now, one thing is in Chrome, it doesn't like, for some reason, this first piece here having quotation marks around it, but that's okay. We can paste it and simply remove those quotation marks at the top for this example. When we do, you'll notice at the bottom here, we have this new little object. I can press enter. We can see it for ourselves. Here it is. It's our object of flights. I can expand that little drop down and see for myself the ability to navigate through this object. We do know that our original object had 1, 2, 3 destinations brought in, And here is our ordinal 0, 1, and 2, our 3 rows. You can see our last one there is to SEA 525, SEA 525. So we can use the console in Chrome to quickly navigate a JSON object and see how to address things. What we can do, if we know what value we have to return back, we can expand until we find the object we want. For example, return back the price of our first one. You can right-click and copy the path name. I can then paste that path name and see how to address it. So straight away we know it's the 0th ordinal, the price value. We know that from there and there. Great. Of course, this is all inside of our flight object, so we have to make sure we append that to the front as well. Let's now jump back into our content block and try this for ourselves. Let's try and address one of these parts of this JSON object. What we can do, we can simply write it out. So we can say write. We're going to write what? Well, no need to build row set from JSON. We can write directly from the object. So I can say write our JSON object. We're going to write the flight element inside the JSON object. We're then going to write what number ordinal. We have 1, 2, 3. Let's return our third one, which is ordinal 0, 1, 2. So we'll return our second. We're then going to return what field. Well, we liked the field of price, didn't we? So let's try and return 500. Let's try and return the price of 500, just like that. Nothing else on the page. Let's go save and refresh. There we are. We can really quickly address the price. We can try something else. Let's address the bag surcharge. There we are. 25, perfect. What happens if we try to address the bag surcharge on one of the previous ones? So not the second or the third ordinal, ordinal 0, 2. What about we do ordinal 0, the very first row? Then what happens? We go save and publish this, we're going to get a bit of a different message. Nothing comes back. Okay. But we can address it though. So it makes it really, really easy for us to navigate our JSON object. Now, additionally, we can use our for loops. So now that we know our write function works and we can address the values that we want, let's now build out our JSON object to write and then to print out that table. So we'll do another write function. We're going to write out, of course, our table. So we'll start our table function and then we'll end our table function like so. Let's give our table function, of course, a border of equal to 1. Now inside our table, we of course want to have some rows, tr. Now inside of those rows, we do know that our table we're trying to print out from our build row set is going to be our 4 table headers, just like in our example. So let's do that. We'll try and print out our 4 table headers, put them there for easy copying and pasting, and we'll do a td. And we'll do this how many times? 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, these should be THs technically. Table headers. So let's do the origin, the destination, the price, and the per bag. So if we print this out now, we should in fact get just those values printing out. Let's try to make sure. Perfect. So there is our headers. Now we want to try and return the values below, and for this we need to use our for loop. So let's take the same code that we already had. We can start to insert in our for loop. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to break up this function because right now we have the top of our table printed out. So now I'm going to break that out and then do the rest of our function with another write. So we have our top of the table written, and here's our bottom of the table closing. We need to now have something in between to write out each row that we're going to produce. Now for this, again, we can use our JavaScript for loop. So I'm going to be lazy, jump in, copy our code from here, and replace our for loop. Once again, we're going to do a variable of I. Now here we can use some cool functions built into JavaScript. So to begin with, we of course have our JSON object called JSON. And here it is here. So our JSON object's length. Now currently the length of our JSON object is 1. There is just one object inside of our JSON relationship here. But inside of the JSON flights, we have 1, 2, 3. So inside of JSON.flights, so you can see inside JSON.flights, we want the .length. The .length function allows the JavaScript object notation to traverse and count the number of rows. It's like an AMPscript row count. So we can now see how many rows there are. So we're going to do this until we hit the number of rows, starting from 0, going up to the number before the final. So from 0 to 2. As we know, it was ordinal 0, 1, and 2. And to do this, we're then going to go and produce what? We're going to do this for loop. Now, here's where it gets cool. What we can do is we can write out the whole function that we need. I'm going to take my write code here and put it below. We don't want to reopen our table, but we do want to reopen our TR. We're then going to do some TDs, so for our cells. So I'll change my THs all to TD. So we have all of our cells ready to go, and of course close the row out there as well. Now here we have our way to address our values. So we know it's going to be the JSON flights, and then we can traverse with those square brackets to count what row we're on, what ordinal we're on. So, like we already know, we can break up our string here by using our double quotes to break it. Rather than saying the word origin, we're going to break, and we're going to use the plus signs to concat, and we can paste in the address, JSON flights, on which row, which ordinal? Well, I is our for loop, so we can use our I function. And then what field do we want? Well, we want the origin field, right? We can now repeat this step the whole way down. So let's quite simply take our code piece here. We can stop the text, print it, and then plus start the text. We can stop the text, print it, and then plus start the text. We can stop the text, print it, and then start the text. So now we have text variable, text variable, text, and so on. Running all that TR out for each of those ordinals, remove our car function, and that's it. Just those couple of lines can now print out what we're trying to achieve. How much neater is that compared to what we had previously on the format rows? So much more script. Well, there's one more thing to consider. Let's save this and print it, and you can see what it looks like. Aha, one error to start with. Let's see what's gone wrong. So to start with, we are printing out our JSON flights on the right thing, and we are bringing back our surcharge, our price, our destination. That's what it was. Plus, like that. It always goes plus to join, plus to join, plus to join. That should do it. Now let's try it. Beautiful. But one small problem. Undefined. The script has realized there was a value there that was null, and therefore the address we gave it didn't work. Okay. But not to worry, we do have some little code examples that we can use to make this much easier in server-side JavaScript. So we can build in a really nice little if statement checker to make sure we have the right values. What we could do is we could write the full if statement out here, but inside of JavaScript we have an inline if statement just like we do inside of AMPscript. And to do this, we can do it inside of a curly bracket in a round brackets like this. We then do our comparison statement, followed by the then, followed by the true value and the false value. So what are we going to check? Well, we're going to check to see if the value of bag surcharge is not equal to, was it undefined? I think undefined is our value that we're checking against. So making sure that if it is not undefined, then the true value is to, well, print out the surcharge. But if it is undefined, then print out nothing. We use two quotes like that. So now we have a little inline if function inside of our print function. Let's see how this works. Go in and refresh. And there we are. We now have nulls. So we can print out our full table structure, returning back our full JSON addressed values inside of our formatted HTML, and we've done some validation as well, all in a couple of lines of code. Now there's one more standout function of server-side JavaScript over AMPscript that I want to show you, and that is the use of JavaScript functions. And it's a concept that you can't use in AMPscript because AMPscript does render from top to bottom. There's no ability to declare functions which you can then reuse. JavaScript, however, allows you to declare your own functions which can be used throughout the code set. So a function allows you to use one piece of code and then reference it throughout, effectively making some miniature processes or functions which you can then reuse to minify your code. What I can do is I can declare myself a little function to change the origin or destination information I've got here in my flight table into a full name of the airport. Now, of course, if my data is coming through like this from my flight API or my database, I may want to use a more customer-friendly name instead. Now, I could have this referenced in a data extension, of course, and I could do a lookup function, but I want to show you how I can work using a function and some more static JSON. So what I can do now is I've got my JSON object. I'm now going to declare one more object. This one's going to be my var of my airports. My airports JSON object is going to have a few things. It's going to have the code as the front part, and then it's going to have what the code will be, the code that I'm going to use, and then it's going to have the actual name of the airport, just like this. So to achieve this, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 unique codes to do. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now for these codes, I've got IND, I've got NYC, I've got LAX, and I've got SEA. So for IND, I believe it's Indianapolis, I believe, is the code for that one. So I can access that one by going to Indianapolis, and I've got it copied here. Didn't want to type that one out. New York. For LAX, I've got Los Angeles, and for SEA, I think it is Seattle. Just like that. With my airport lookup table built as a JSON object, I can then reference it later on, which means I can make a really cool little function. So I can declare a function by saying function and then what? Well, this could be called code to name. That's a fair one. I can then declare my variables and then build my function. So inside of my function called code to name, I'm going to declare what? Well, it's going to be the code that I want to look up. I'm going to then return a name. And the name is the name that I then want to print out inside of the code piece that I've referenced from my function. So what I can do is I can make a lookup. And I can say var name is equal to the airport.code. Now the airport's JSON object has been referenced, and then I can return back the code value, saving that, not the code value, so looking up the code value, returning back the name, because these are name value paired in my JSON object. So I'm going to look up the code provided, which could be IND, for example, look up the code and return back the variable or the value provided as that value name pair, which would be Indianapolis, which will then save as name and then printing out that value. So this little function means I don't have to go and look up every single time. I can reference this little function. So inside of my flight origin piece here, what I could do is I could say for my origin, don't print out the value from the JSON. Instead, run that function and provide the code of the origin. And then once again, for the next piece, I could say, well, don't get the destination. Instead, once again, run that function, providing the destination code, which would in this case be the destination of my next one, so NYC. It'd print NYC here, run the function with NYC as the code function, as a code value provided, go into the airport's JSON object with NYC, look for NYC, look for NYC, NYC found, return back the value of New York as the name, and then return the name to that piece to then print out. How nifty is that? Although one thing I have to change is that should have been declared as a square because that now references the variable as an address. My bad, it's not a dot, it's a square bracket. So that done, I can put my semicolon and close that off, and let's try it out. Go save and... Alright, so we now have, rather than destination origin codes, we have the actual address printed for the name. All in one cheeky little piece of code, just like that, we can now look up from a code piece to the actual airport name. And you can use these functions to do any kinds of repeatable tasks you want. You could use this function to do more formatting, like I've done here. I could do some date or number formats. Any code that's repeatable, you don't want to have to keep cycling through and typing out through your entire code block. You can box up into a repeatable function, which can then be called later on, like I've done, to repeat that aspect of the code. Again, a very efficient and clean way to write your code, definitely a huge improvement over AMPscript. So as you can see, there are a heap of similarities which will help you to learn server-side JavaScript if you already know AMPscript, but it also raises the ceiling a lot higher. Server-side JavaScript has so much more functionality and the ability to write so much more complex code you might be familiar with using AMPscript. So I wholeheartedly recommend taking some time now to investigate some of the codes that you can do inside of Server Side JavaScript, and take the journey to go through and learn how these functions can be applied and change the way that you do your personalization and marketing. Now be aware that there are some pros and cons for rendering times when it comes to server-side JavaScript versus AMPscript. For example, AMPscript is faster at looking up and printing text, but server-side JavaScript can be used in an SSJS activity in Automation Studio, which means it is a lot more deployable to some different functions, such as API calls, which I've done in previous videos. Again, take the time to learn the code so you can increase the ceiling of things that you can do inside of Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I'll be doing some more videos on server-side JavaScript, so make sure you stay tuned and give the video a big thumbs up if you enjoyed the content today. And make sure you let me know in the comments what kinds of functions you'd like to see done inside of server-side JavaScript. And don't forget that you can stay tuned to my Marketing Cloud channel by subscribing so that you get notified when I release more Salesforce Marketing Cloud content.